Greetings, 3DMJers. Welcome to Leg Day with Coach Alberto Nunez and our physical therapist slash management specialist, our injury management specialist, Nick Lickermelli. Appreciate you guys taking your time and joining me here today. So, Bert, bro, I got to talk to you about your knees going over your toes. You can't be doing that, bro. Your patellar ligaments, they're just going to fly just right off of your tibial tuberosities. Why are you doing that? All joking aside, though, what's the strategy there?
Well, I don't know, man. It's safe, first of all. And I think for me, it was always kind of the most natural way to squat. But yeah, I had heard that before. Like, hey, don't. Actually, the first cert, it was not a very good cert. But yeah, that was the one thing that they would tell us is like keep those knees behind the toes, whether it was a squat or leg press. But yeah, things have changed a lot, I think, over the last decade when we look at the dynamics of, I guess, most people's lower body training. So I guess we can't go over like what most people are doing today without addressing how things were prior. And I'm going to take it a little bit further back. I think we can start off with like the power building era, but there was an era before that I think it was necessary for us as a collective to go through this like power building era. And that was the people weren't very, very objective about their leg day training. So before we got everyone to like sumo deadlift and squat, low bar squat even, right? A lot of the way most people managed their lower body training, it was more focused on how intensive the session was, right? So how many exercises they could do, like, were you vomiting, bro? Have you ever vomited during a lower body day? If you haven't, or you just haven't earned your stripes, that's why your legs suck. How sore, pump, things like that. And as we all know, those aren't very like trusty proxies to, decide whether or not your training is working. So that's how most natural bodybuilders were doing it. And I think the running joke in the early 2000s was it like natties don't have legs, oddly enough. And it's funny because I think fast forward to now, I think most natural bodybuilders will tell you that, yeah, it's when I look at the enhanced guys, it's not necessarily their lower bodies that I'm most like lightweight envious about, but it's their, their delts, traps, like roundness up top. But lower body, like most of the time, I think most natural bodybuilders tend to be just a little bit on the like bottom heavy side of things. So I think it speaks to the fact that, hey, we've improved the way we manage things as a community. So yeah, we were doing things like that prior, and then power building shows up. And I think what this did for a lot of people, why people for the longest time were like, okay, I swear by like these core lifts, was because it got people to think objectively about their training, because, people are more cautious and careful about how they progress with those movements. And there's that cultural aspect. There's like, hey, can you squat 2 plates? Can you squat 3? Or can you squat 4 plates? So people were always kind of chasing these metrics. And obviously those proxies are much more trustworthy when it comes to like, okay, this is, chances are if you added a plate to your squat, plate on each side over the course of a year, your legs have probably improved. Whereas you can't really say that if you're just following the more old school like format for lower body days, where it's really about like, hey, we're able to like fight off the burn and fight off the vomit. So yeah, even though we're kind of coming off that power building era, I do think it was useful in that it got people thinking about progressions in a much more clear way than before.
Yeah, and Bert, refresh my memory. When you had your injury in 2008, you couldn't squat, correct? It seems like I remember you deadlifting and then doing like lots of lunges and leg extensions. But Am I correct there, or was there some stuff I'm missing there?
No, you are correct, and that was hard to let go because like a lot of those folks, it's like I had tried the hey, let me follow that method that like lower body days are just supposed to be, I guess, all about the pain, like resisting the pain and being sore for a week. Then I kind of moved over to these I guess core lifts, right, as they're commonly called. And I saw great progress when I started incorporating those lifts a little bit more. So yeah, I got hurt, and because those lifts were taken away from me for a substantial, actually it was like 2 years, which felt like an eternity at the time. I was kind of freaked out. I'm like, hey, what's going to happen to my lower body? Because I attributed a lot of my development to the squat primarily and some deadlifting.
Because I remember that light bulb moment coming on for me when you were kind of bottom heavy back in 2008, 2009 when you won your pro card. And I mean, arguably, you probably built a lot of your lower body through those core movements, if I'm understanding it correctly, the squatting and whatnot. But at the same time, it was like his legs didn't shrink. This man has a squat in 2 years, and arguably you had some of the best quads, in the amateur shows that you did, if not the best quads. And so I was kind of like, I remember scratching my head at the time thinking, maybe there's something to this, more, I guess, just being okay with letting some of those movements go and being able to still, build muscle and all the gains and hypertrophies and stuff like that.
Well, I wasn't sure that was going to happen. Just, that was a complete surprise. I was just like ready for whatever.
Exactly.
Like,
that's like I said, it made me scratch my head.
It's funny how that happens like that with so many different things. How we don't even think about changing anything. We're afraid to change. And then something happens where we're forced to change. And then we realize, oh, I didn't lose my legs or knees over toes, right? Like, oh, I did I had hip pain and I couldn't squat deep into my hips. So I had to do more of a heel elevated squat, and wow, my knees feel great. Actually, this feels actually pretty comfortable, and it actually works better with my femurs and the way that I'm built. So, it's funny how that happens, sometimes. And I think that it would be kind of funny to go down the history of leg day. So I didn't go through the power building phase, but for me, training legs, when I first started lifting back in high school, the only time I would train legs was if the strength and conditioning coach for the football team forced us to squat. And it was like, get the bar on my back and do what he asked me to do. If he says 5 reps, do 5. If he says 3, do 3. Put the bar back and then go do some curls. And my brother and I used to train in our parents' garage. We would just bench, maybe do some pull downs and just train arms, and that was our training. And then when I got into muscle magazines, Muscle and Fitness, Muscle and Fitness, say what you want about Muscle and Fitness, but it really did teach me a lot about transitioning a high school kid into a bodybuilder. And I was an obsessed bodybuilder chasing pain, but at the same time, it got me thinking, and it got me changing my thoughts. So I started training legs, and I could tell you the exact workout that I did because I did it for years and years. 5 sets of squats, 4 sets of leg press, and then a walking lunge superset with a leg extension, seated leg curl, lying leg curl. And drop sets on everything, sometimes drop sets on the last 2 sets. And the feeling that my goal would be to not be able to walk. I would need that jelly-like feeling in my legs, the intense burning, like that was the goal every time. And you guys may remember this, and a lot of our listeners probably will too. I blame Lane Norton because, do you remember the Inside the Life of a Natural Pro on bodybuilding.com? Lane said, one sentence that changed my that forever like prolonged my chasing of pain with leg day. He said that he got feedback about his legs, and someone told him, if you want to grow your legs, you better teach yourself to tolerate some pain.
I remember.
For that to land on my ears, it just prolonged this chase of the vomiting feeling and the lactic acid addiction during training. But at the same time, like we've talked about, I feel like you have to go there in order to come out of it and appreciate what failure is and what kind of not to do. So yeah, that was my kind of introduction to leg day. And now I like we're gonna eventually talk about, it's much different. I train in my basement, so I kind of am stuck to the squat and split squats and things like that. But the second that I end up at a gym somewhere, like I'm not even looking at the squat rack. Like I am just enjoying the machines and the controlled motions and quad focus on different squatting patterns. So yeah, I guess it's important to go through that phase, but at the same time, I would have liked to know what we know now back then. So hopefully this falls on some fertile soil and can help, I guess, speed up that learning process and maybe prevent some aches and pains.
Brad, you didn't go through that phase because you kind of were like a max OT guy almost out the box, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, pretty low volume, really, but also low frequency. It's like 3 sets of squats, maybe a leg press, and then leg extensions and leg curls. So yeah, it was very much kind of that power builder approach, I guess you might say. Boy, I lost my train of thought there. Where was I going to go with that? So yeah, I mean, we kind of look at what we're doing today and things that we're doing today, and really, it's almost kind of a relief, in my opinion, because there was a long time there where I was afraid not to squat. It was like, if I want to grow quads, if I want to get the symmetry that I want, I've got to squat. And in fact, really, that's probably more important than doing my isolation work, my leg extensions, my leg curls, and lunges and things like that. And now it's almost kind of like we've done it, almost kind of gone 180, and not only with those kind of a movement, but you would have never caught me doing partial range of motion on a leg curl, for example, right? You'd have never caught me doing that. It was like full range of motion, lock out to where the pad is on your butt. When you can't reach your butt anymore, you're done. And now it's kind of like, especially with all the stuff that Milo Wolf is doing, and it's like, you know what? Those are still some good repetitions. There's still some more gas in the tank there. There's still some more juice to be squeezed out. And it's also very, very, in my opinion, just relieving that, hey, you know what? I can kind of squeeze a little bit more out of this and be okay with it. Sure, I might get some screwy looks from people that have known me for 23 years and known how I used to train, But man, what a nice bag of bricks to put down.
The leg day boot camp was great, and I like Nick, I'm very fond of those memories, but at the same time, like, it should have been a much shorter boot camp. Like, the course should have been significantly more condensed.
Yeah, for sure. Brad, you mentioned a word that set off a lot of thoughts in my mind, relief, and fear of not squatting. And that is the same exact process I went through in physical therapy. So leaving physical therapy school, it's very much the biomedical model where you need to release or stretch your hip flexors because it's tipping your pelvis, and you need to be symmetrical, and you got to watch your foot pronation and a neutral spine, and you're walking around on eggshells and thinking if I don't foam roll before this leg session, I'm going to get hurt. I just know it. Or if I don't do this corrective exercise I know I'm going to get hurt. I know that my lower trap is weak. I need to do these exercises for my scapula because I don't want to get hurt. And so it is that fear. And then when you slowly stop doing those things, or something happens, you don't have your foam roller one day, or like we said with Alberto getting hurt, something will happen that will force you not to do those things, and then you prove yourself wrong. And then you dive into some more research, like you said, Milo Wolf is putting out, and then there's almost a relief to kind of go through that change. So yeah, when you said the word relief, I could definitely relate to that in bodybuilding, but also physical therapy, because early on in my career, I would take a patient and have to like dive into every body part and then explain to them how your foot is doing this, that's causing your knee, that's causing your hip, and it would sometimes get very overwhelming to try to keep it all in line, and then trying to come across as confident to the patient and all those things. That was tough early on, and now it's kind of like that meme where you have, like, on one end you have the guy who looks like a newbie. He kind of like a rough around the edges kind of guy, and he says, monitor workload and focus on sleep. And then there's like the guy in the middle who's like, he says like, watch your foot pronation, don't let your knees go over your toes, get your hips realigned, your spine is out of alignment, and then it goes back down, and there's like a Jedi, like, and he says, manage workload and focus on sleep. So we kind of go through that process, but from that peak back down to the Jedi is very much relief, that I would describe that as.
Yeah, and it's so funny how, I mean, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but how stubborn we can be, because I went through that whole scratching my head process of seeing Alberto on stage and competing against him and seeing how good his legs were, and then knowing a little bit of his backstory. And yet still, after that head-scratching moment, I went probably at least a decade, maybe just under a decade, with the fear of not squatting and not growing if I didn't squat, So yeah, that's, I have to put my Eric Helms hat on for just a second and kind of make a little bit of a parallel here, because Eric did a really good review in Mass. I think it was either the February issue or maybe the January, but that was the opposite end of the body. It was the shoulders, and if you had to overhead press in order to get good delt growth, and it was a really good review that he did. But basically, if I recall the conclusion correctly, it's kind of like, we have so many different ways to work the deltoid, that, if you can overhead press, great, go ahead and do it. But if you can't, evidence shows it's not going to break your game. You're not going to lose all your delt gains, and you're still going to be able to grow, without the overhead press. And so, yeah, I think that it's just a matter of time before we end up getting that same kind of a study and that same kind of review with squatting, squat patterns and things like that, and comparing those things there. And so, yeah, I had to get my science nerd hat on there for just a second and make a little bit of relevance there. But Berto, I mean, talk a little bit about some of the revelations that you've had, because I'm a fan of all you guys, and I watch your videos with the split squats and the heel elevated and the knees going over the toes and things like that. For the listeners that may be like shocked to hear some of these things, what's kind of your thinking there? What is the strategy? Is it you've actually seen it? You've seen growth in your quads, or is it something that you read, or kind of give us a little bit of insight there?
Well, I remember one of the reasons I trained the way I did is, well, you kind of like hang on to camps that you just vibe with. And I think at the time, Ronnie Coleman was one for me. There was something about Ronnie. I think the fact that like no one was having as much fun as Ronnie at the gym. Like that was
that's the truth.
That was like, those videos will never get old.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually joking with Cynthia the other day. It's like, it'd be cool if Sunny wanted a Ronnie Coleman themed birthday party. When she's old enough to decide. But yeah, man. So I remember two of my favorite IFBB guys that I really enjoyed their physiques was Kevin Levrone and Ronnie Coleman. And I remember when comparing their legs, and this is funny because I was such a myopic way of looking at this, but I would look at their legs and I'm like, well, Kevin is, just this party boy with like this immense talent. And, he does all these exercises where he's just kind of chilling on his back and like leg pressing. And it's like, you could see it in their legs. I don't know. There might be something about the squat with like, the fact that like the hips and the knees are extending at the same time. And yeah, I was making up stuff. I was trying to see the things I wanted to see, I imagine. And so now I'm like, well, the reason Ronnie looked the way he did was just the fact that he was just a much more dense individual, just at baseline, a just robust skeletal structure. And by the way, I don't think it was the way Ronnie lifted that kind of screwed him up. He just got some bad procedures done because he's just been worse since, because a lot of people go to that. Yeah, he could have probably toned it down a bit, but like it wasn't those movements in my opinion necessarily. Anyhow, a lot of folks who are not ready to give up those core movements, like that is what they look at. They look at the pool of people who are out there and they see a distinct difference between the people who like deadlift and squat and the people who maybe don't, right? Something that's brought up often is like the guys that squat and deadlift are just more dense. And I would argue that there would be dense individuals regardless. Like if you were to just look at their spines, like their rib cages, like all their bones, they're dense because they're dense and they're able to hang on to these movements for a longer period of time because they're just more robust individuals. So it's not that it's like chicken or the egg, right? Did basketball make that guy tall? No, not necessarily. He was tall, so he played basketball. This person is like a silverback. So to them, like the barbell, no problem, right? So yeah, that was what I was afraid of because I'm a smaller frame guy. And it's like, I want to be like dense, like these dudes. But I mean, I was unbreakable until I wasn't, basically, right? So yeah, now in hindsight, I'm like, okay, I need to stick to things that are a little bit more, I guess, joint friendly for me. And like, I love the barbell. There's a certain satisfaction, like a PR on a squat, man, or a deadlift, like nothing compares.
Yes.
But if I want to keep lifting and progressing for as long as I can, I think for me, it just makes more sense to transition over to movements that are structurally less taxing and also systematically less taxing. So yeah, we're just taking a more refined approach. And I think now I can kind of pull apart the layers and I'm pretty sure that I'm not just doing it because of, certain limitations that you just like have once you're like beyond a certain age. It's because I do think this is what is going to net me the most results. Working off another anecdote, this was, I think it was the last USAPO Nationals that I went to, 2018 maybe, or 19, one of those. I think it was 19. But the 83 kilo junior class, all these guys, like in the junior class, so these guys aren't even like full adults yet. Out of the 25 lifters there, I think 22 of them were able to squat 500 pounds. Right?
Jeez.
So these are really good squatters. They're better than just about everyone, you could say. Like chances are, if you're listening to this podcast, yeah, they're probably stronger and more skilled at that lift than you. So I went and I looked at their Instagrams and I wanted to see what their training was like. And it was crazy. So they used the squat as the vehicle to get stronger at their squats. But what the majority of these people, and these are some of the best squatters in the world. And they're young. They're only going to get better. They were using things like belt squats, like leg presses, like hack squats to make the engine bigger so then they could put it in like the car frame, which is the squat. So right then and there, I'm like, this should be an aha moment to like bodybuilders. It's like these really good squatters understand the limitations of the squat, that, you know, they can't take it, especially they want to get stronger, like super close to failure all the time. That maybe they should use movements when it comes to muscle growth for the prime movers that aren't going to be limited by other things outside of the prime mover. Like right there, that was like a light bulb. I'm like, bodybuilders, like just look at what these guys are doing, and they're much better squatters than you. Not only that, they're made for the squat, right? All had like these long torsos, these short little femurs. So yeah, I've refined the way I program lower body sessions for myself, for my athletes. Nevertheless, if someone's like, hey, I just really enjoy squatting and I do feel like their target is big enough at this point that it's like, okay, like it really won't matter that much. Sure, have at it. But generally speaking, if we have access to the right tools, it's like, why not use that? And I think that although there's very few lifts that are funner than a squat and a deadlift, there's just better ways to make your lower body grow.
Yeah, that's good shit right there, Bert. And you know, I think it's going to be important that we kind of like, look, you know what, we're not swearing off squatting, you know, because I mean, it is for the most part, it's a natural movement, right? I mean, Bert, you're going to see this. Sunny is going to just perform the most beautiful squat that you have ever seen, you know, when she starts walking. And we see that all the time, the little memes with the little kids that just squat down effortlessly, you know, and then just sit there flat-footed on the ground and play with their little toy, right? I mean, I can't really let go of squatting yet. You know, here I am getting ready for a meet. I think part of my success is I'm a big boned dude. You know, here I am walking around at sub 170 pounds, about, you know, high 160s. I don't think I'm supposed to be that way. I think the way that as big and blocky as my pelvis is, and like you've seen when we're together, your wrists and your elbows are so much tinier than mine. I feel like I'm supposed to walk around at 210 pounds. You know what I mean? And I think that's why I can kind of tolerate these lifts a little bit better. But I digress here because I want to throw it over, you know, to my man Nick here and have him talk about squatting and we're not warding off squats, right? We're just saying through that wonderful, you know, dissertation that Berto just gave that, you know, it can be part of your program. It doesn't have to rule it, right? There's smarter ways to build up the horsepower in that engine. So Nick, talk about that and the squat patterns and hip hinges and all those fundamental movements that the human body can do.
Hey 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez popping in with some really great news today. We just released Nutrition Fundamentals for Lifters, our latest course in the 3DMJ Vault by our Chief Science Officer, Eric Helms. This is the foundation of dietary understanding that every athlete needs before they start calculating their calories or their macros or any type of meal planning. All of those counting and tracking skills are great to learn, and of course, we already have vault courses that cover them, but if you don't know their purposes and limitations, you'll likely shoot yourself in the foot by overestimating their importance and becoming overly reliant on them. There is so much wasted time trying to learn how to track food, how to lose fat, how to live life while hungry, and how to think about food all at the same time. And every experienced bodybuilder knows that the mental models are what should have come first. If you don't know how to holistically and productively think about your nutrition, it doesn't matter how much willpower or discipline you think you have. It'll all eventually snap. It always does, and you'll be forced to go back and learn these skills in the long run anyways. We've seen it time and time with our new athletes, and it's the first thing that we have to address before letting them enter another fat loss phase that will likely fail if we don't take a few steps back and get these things down. So since we've dealt with this problem so many times before firsthand, we knew it was something we had to add to the vault, and we can't wait for you guys to take the course. Nutrition Fundamentals for Lifters will go over energy balance, maintenance calories, behavior and habit tracking versus food tracking, how to find where you fall on the flexibility versus consistency scale, how to use body weight measurements, how to know when you're ready to cut or gain, 5 different ways to track your food, and a whole lot more. This is the 25th course in the 3DMJ Vault, which is our online learning platform of organized video-based education for serious lifters. And you can become a VIP member and get access to every single one of those courses by purchasing an annual or lifetime membership with a single one-time purchase. Head on over to 3dmjvault.com and sign yourself up today. That's 3dmjvault.com to get all access. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the rest of the show.
Since you mentioned the babies, the thing with babies is that they're not little adults. They're a whole different animal. So, and not that you were saying this, Brad, but it's a common meme out there to watch how babies squat and try to emulate that. It's not possible. It's like looking at when they make the Barbie doll realistic and the person's got like all like weird features and like their head is certain size. And so babies have basically 360 degrees of range of motion in their hips. That's a joke, but their joints are basically like squishy jelly that just moves whenever they want to move. They got big old heads, big old torsos, small
their arms
legs.
barely go above their they can be full on extended and their fingers just barely go to the top of their head.
Yeah, like a baby will do things that no human adult can, but it is fun to watch them move around. But yeah, when it comes to what are there fundamental movements every human being should do, it's a tough conversation because most of the time, I would say the vast majority of the time, I would say there is no movement that someone has to do or someone is required to do. It all depends on their goal. The squat, however, the way that we live our lives tends to be present in a lot of different things in one way, shape, or form. Sitting on a toilet, sitting on a chair, getting up out of a car, even at the lowest level. You have a senior citizen who can't get out of bed. What we're going to do is sit on the edge of the bed and try to stand. That's a squatting pattern. So I think the squat or some version of the squat or some version of a hip hinge can be quite protective because what you do, your body gets adapted to. So if you spend your life doing some kind of squatting pattern, it will eventually help you down the road. My father-in-law actually just this weekend, guy takes care of himself, goes to the gym. He fell. He was walking his dog. The dog took off. He tripped over the sidewalk, fell. He bounced back up. Like he ended up fracturing a rib, but he is fine. Like a couple of days later, he's back up and moving, and it's because the guy has trained. He's built up strength, and you can use that example in so many different things. And in my profession, I just see it time and time again. People that just haven't exercised throughout their life and haven't built up any of that resiliency. A fall is all it takes to lights out. Like it's that serious sometimes. So I think that resistance training and exercise is protective, is important. And if we dive deeper into resistance exercise and training, I think squats and hinging are probably the primary things that you want to have in any kind of program. And then you can take those and make them more individual to whatever their goals are. If they want to stand up and clean up a pot in the sink, then you maybe hold a medicine ball or hold an actual pot in the clinic and have them practice that motion. But I think fundamentally, it's probably a good thing for everyone to train some kind of squat or hinging pattern. And the other thing that I was thinking when Berto was talking, you mentioned that it's not that you are training the way you're training because you have to, because you're working around discomfort necessarily. It's more that you're seeing the best results and it feels the best for you. I think that's how it should be approached. But the benefit is that you can also use it if you are having discomfort. If the squat is giving you pain, if it's just not feeling right, if you're not feeling it in your quads or your glutes or wherever you're trying to feel it, have the freedom to change it up. So it helps my job a lot when I have a bodybuilder who is having issues with the squat. Yes, we can absolutely change things, change load, change range of motion, change proximity to failure. But at some point, why don't we just swap it out and stop playing this game like trying to chase a unicorn and get us to be able to squat? Let's just spend some time doing other movements. The joints and soft tissues on a leg press or hack squat are still getting loaded and being put through hip flexion, knee flexion, ankle dorsiflexion. Like, you're still doing the pattern under load, and you're still getting the training effect. And then down the road, try avoiding it for a couple weeks, and then we'll work back into some modified body weight squats or just the bar, and then we can kind of build up from there. So I think, yeah, that was awesome that you mentioned that it's not just avoiding those things because your joints, it's more you're seeing the results, but then the other benefit of that is that it could very well be used, this kind of paradigm shift with leg training, back to that word relief. It is relieving to know that, hey, like, I have this pain, I'm having difficulty squatting. That doesn't mean I'm less of a bodybuilder. That just means I have to take a sidestep for the time being. So yeah, I think it's more than just this conversation of we have been down the one road and now we're changed. I think it's really, really important and could be pretty empowering to kind of accept this and try it out for yourself.
Yeah, and the word that kept popping into my head is you're talking about swapping things out and moving around, and even Berto talking about, a lot of these elite power lifters doing things like belt squats, and things like that. It's, periodization is a lot more than just changing reps and sets, and frequencies and things like that. I think it was Chris Duffin that was like, periodize your exercises, and you don't have to squat all the time. I mean, if you love squatting, build it in as a period of your training, because I can guarantee you that when Brad gets done doing this powerlifting meet and getting his powerlifting competition fix done, and I start really focusing on bodybuilding, I am not going to care about squatting anymore. In fact, really, Jeff is going to design my program for me. I'm going to remove my brain and I'm going to trust in his thinking. And if I do not squat or deadlift or bench press with a bar, I am just fine with that. And like you just said, Nick, it's a relief. It's a relief to know, okay, you know what? We've got this belt squat thing in the corner and I've got this reverse hyper machine. That's part of a good training plan that still utilizes those, kind of core fundamental movements. So, yeah, what a relief that is, that Brad doesn't have to panic while being starving and sub 10% body fat and having added stress to that. So, gosh, guys, I don't know where I want to take this conversation now. I mean, really, to be honest with you, but just some things that came to mind is things that we haven't talked about yet. We haven't talked about some of the fun things that are out there right now. I remember how fun it was, Berto, when you went over dog crap training. It was like, ooh, mile repetitions, and I could not wait to start, suffering in that way, shape or form. And right now, going to failure on leg curls, leg extensions, things like that, calves, absolutely diabolical in how it feels, but at the same time, just really fun to go to failure on a leg curl and then just try to get 3, 4, 5 more repetitions, try as hard as you can, and you're just failing, really enjoying those right now, Burl, have you been using those much? Have you prescribed those much? Where do you see the utility in that with your athletes?
I think the biggest changes, we do throw some of those in, but I think the biggest changes has been in, I guess, creating the longest, most stable, like, moment arm possible, like, within the prime mover, which means that your loads are going to take a hit in some cases, right? So, for example, like most people, when they get on the leg press, where they place their stance is kind of in a neutral place where they can have a lot of muscle groups like joining in at once. So it's not just quads, it's like quads and friends. It's like quads, the adductors, the glutes. They're all helping. So what I'll do is just to, for example, on that movement, is have them move their feet as low as they can. And for some people, they can even have a little bit of heel lift. And because there's so many more constraints on a leg press, like, they don't lose a whole lot of output, if any at all. And we just perform the leg press that way with the knees really kicking forward. And the cool part is, like, hey, you don't have to use as many warm-ups because you can't go as heavy.
You can't go very heavy.
It introduces you to perhaps some in ranges you haven't really had a chance to visit before, especially if you were, not built in a squat specific fashion, which I have found to be just great for, like, joint integrity. Like, when we first got our side back hack squat at the gym, it's a very knee dominant movement as is, but I really pushed the limits to the point where, like, my feet are at the bottom, like touching the floor basically. And it was great to see that it was like that good pain. Like, you learn to tell the difference. Like, the first few times I did it, I was like, ooh, my knees don't fully like it, but I know it's just going to get better every time. So there's like some therapeutic properties to it. My knees have always been like a pretty good joint, but I'm like, oh my God, they're going to be like just super fortified at the end of this, aside from like just the quad gains. And as you get older, you really start to appreciate the fact that, like, man, like, I'm strong through the full range of motion. So a lot of it is figuring that out with the quad stuff, like the squat patterns, and then a lot less pulling from the floor, some more like hip hinges, like whichever one people tend to be the most proficient in. And then with the ISO stuff, it's just been, I don't know, that's a great way to rack up like some extra volume, and it's way less taxing systematically as well. But I will say this, when especially on the leg press, when you're like really biasing the quads, like, you can go pretty close to failure or to failure, and it's not all that terrible because the loads are lighter, so there's less inhibition. And since there isn't all these muscle groups firing at once, or less of like the adductors and the glutes, right? It's just, it doesn't drain you nearly as much. So yeah, a lot of it has just been looking at how the athletes put together what equipment they have access to, and trying to find the best fit. And again, not everyone has everything, and there's always ways to work around that. And even if they want to squat, like, it's one of those things where it's just important to understand the strengths of your tool. Like, with a barbell squat, it's got its pros, but it also has its cons, and also understanding the limitations as well. But yeah, for the most part, it's just been using things that maybe make it so that we can't lift as much, but again, we're creating these longer moment arms and more torque in those lengthened positions. So it's like, hey, that 4.5 plate deadlift 4 sets of 5 you were doing, it's like, we might be like just under 3 plates with our RDL, but it's going to be way better for the areas that you're trying to target, right? And more specific to those tissues. But again, I'm not anti-fun either. I think at some point I want to try squatting again, now that like my quads have grown substantially since the last time I dipped into squatting. And I think last time I barely squeaked over 500. And I do think this next time, because of the upgrades in muscle mass, I'll probably like clear that a lot more efficiently. Yeah. So yeah, that's the main thing when it comes to lower body days. And they tend to be a lot less daunting. And since the loads aren't as big, like people don't get like hungry hippo with it and like try to do too much. They're a lot more patient with it. Because it's not like anything you're going to be lifting is like super impressive. Like when you look at Dirk's lifts, like people don't realize like Dirk can be a really strong dude if he wants to, especially with his like shorter appendages. But like we're trying to figure out ways to make the exercises as challenging as possible. So yeah, a lot of that that's been basically what we've been doing. And yeah, some things like integrated partials. Again, the myo rep work I think really comes in handy, especially when you're dieting, because it just saves up a lot of like those carbs. So things are just a little bit less, just less total reps over the course of a training session. But I don't know, man, a person has to be ready for that intervention. But oddly enough, by the time a person is ready for that, they mentally, I guess they've been training long enough where, yeah, the target is getting smaller. They have to be more specific at this point. And more than another plate on the squat, they just want to see growth in their quads, growth that they, in some cases haven't seen in years.
Yeah, it is a change in mindset. You mentioned the leg press, and with the kind of heels elevated, you can't really, there's not much that you can do to prolong failure. It's almost like you go down, you feel the burn, you go down again, and you're just like, oh, that's not moving. Like that's all I got. As opposed to getting strapped into a leg extension machine and like cranking up reps and it's burning, but you're compensating and it's burning more, you're burning more. Like you can't do that stuff. It's just like you go down, that's not moving anymore. Okay, guess that's what I got for this set. So before I mentioned that I use a barbell squat because I'm training at home, but it's very different than a typical someone getting under the bar. Like I'm using a heel lift. I'm going in there with that mindset of imagining I'm in some kind of machine, just letting that bar go down and come back up. When I can't do that anymore, maybe I'll get a rep or two where I pop the hips back and just kind of get it up so I don't get crushed. But I am using that change in technique almost like a spotter. So like I'm going down, keeping that nice and controlled. And then when I need to call upon that, yeah, I'll help myself up 1 or 2 times, but I'm doing that knowing that I'm doing it. And then I mentioned that I also do split squats. I have slowly elevated my front foot to get a deeper stretch on my glute in the fully lengthened position. So at this point, I have 3 plates under my front foot, and I'm getting that nice deep stretch. Like it feels like, honestly, that movement feels like I'm just stretching my glutes holding a dumbbell. It doesn't. That's kind of the mindset going into it. But yeah, I think that mindset shift of I'm going to annihilate this weight off my back versus I'm going to keep this as strict as possible, and focus on the muscle I'm trying to hit, trying to get depth that I want, and to get to those depths, take it slow. Don't, if you're just used to doing walking lunges, don't go put that front foot up on a rear foot elevated split squat and just whoop, pop right down. Make sure you take it slow and do some lightweight movements and see if you can go that deep. If you have pain with those range of motion, then gradually work into them. But if you want to get to those points, at least you have a goal to move forward to. But if you can't right away, don't worry about it. Like you can gradually work into those depths. But yeah, I like what you said, Bert, about the mindset going into it. It's a lot less taxing, like emotionally and physically, because there's not much more you can do. It's just, all right, that's it. It's a literal failure. I can't move my leg anymore.
3 things you said there, Nick. I think one, with really lengthened positions, because the muscle is always going to fatigue from shortened to lengthened. And I guess what you'll never see like a 3-second, I don't know, like pullover, right? Compared to say like a leg extension. So those things just kind of, like sometimes it looks like on, say, my hack squat is like, he just gave up. I'm like, no, dude, that was like an RP, like 9.5. Like, it's just the next set. It's like someone just cuts the cable on the elevator. Like, it's just done. And then the other thing is, the sensation's very different, because I think most of us initially, we perhaps look too much for like the squeeze portion, and it's different sensations that you're training yourself to look for when it is something that is lengthened. And lastly, it's like, the range of motion can be a progression scheme. Like with my hack squat, like I told you, my knees were a little achy, like just the right amount of watery afterwards where I'm like, oh, I needed this. Like this was something I needed to tap into. Like there's these lines in the hack squat, and instead of like upping load, I would just kind of sneak my feet like a little bit more. So yeah, it's a very, man, it's like eating caviar, right? It's you don't just like trash it like I don't know, like a Chinese buffet. Like it's something that you really have to be locked in and aware, but it's a totally different, much more mature way.
I hope, if anything, that we're exciting some of the less strong bodybuilders and powerlifters up there, and dare I say, even like I don't want to use the term old, but our seasoned bodybuilders, right, that have been at the game in a long time. And they're like, man, I can't do it anymore. I can't handle these loads anymore. I can't handle the exercises anymore. It's like, well, you know what? You could be tapping into newbie-ish type gains if you try. Let's just work that range of motion a little bit more. Let's get that muscle a little bit more stretched under load. Let's make it move that load from that fully stretched position. And guess what? It ain't going to have to be a whole lot. You're going to find yourself like a kid again, curling those 210s on the end of that easy curl bar, and it's really, really heavy, and it's also, you're going to find that it's also, pretty darn effective, at that. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of exciting to know that all of these things that we've talked about here, gentlemen, are things that I've just now kind of scratched the surface on, and here I'm kind of thinking, that this is Brad's last hurrah, in bodybuilding, and really excited about powerlifting and kind of tacking on the bodybuilding on top of it, because it's kind of on the way, you know what I mean? But at the same time, it's like, well, maybe not. You know what? Maybe there's something to competing well into your 50s and even early 60s if you can, make that mindset of, okay, let's just let the ego go here a little bit. Berto, I think that you recently said that you're benching a $185 with that funky looking bar that's got the bend in the middle. Your elbows are like practically touching the floor on your bench press. Those are the kind of things that are kind of exciting. I can kind of start over again, over with the Brad that was elated when I was squatting 225 for the very first time. Well, I can kind of do that now with 135 pounds on the bar. And instead of throwing 10 plates on the leg press, let's cut that in half, and put a plate or two and maybe a quarter, and then let my butt come off the bench a little bit, and them heels rise up and really stretch those quads, and play around with that sensation that you guys talked about, that weird sensation. It's just like you're pushing, but nothing's happening. Yeah, that is pretty odd. So, Jens, I don't know where else I want to go with this. I mean, Bert, Nick, do you guys have anything else you want to tack on top of this?
I have a final thought. So we're having this conversation, and one of the things that I always am amazed by is we get caught in our bubble. Our followers, they ask great questions, great comments. This is probably not the first time they're hearing some version of this conversation. But then there's always like mainstream fitness, and it always is a shocker to me at just how far we have to go to to make such a small change in mainstream fitness. And even mainstream fitness, not like, I guess I'm thinking about what you see on daytime TV at a fitness segment, but also in more of the untested world, like bodybuilding as a whole. I guess the bros, but also just bodybuilding in general. Like if someone were to close their eyes, a new lifter, and point to somewhere in bodybuilding, where are they gonna fall? Are they gonna fall on people more like us or other more like mainstream kind of fitness? And I wonder if we're gonna go into a gym someday and actually this is gonna be the norm. Like I don't know if this leaves here and actually gets out there. I'm hopeful because I'm one of the things that I love seeing is everything that Dr. Mike and Renaissance Periodization are doing as of recent, because they are really getting a hold of some of those people. I didn't watch the video yet, but I saw a video that was titled "Two Olympians Train Legs," and it was under Renaissance Periodization. And I don't have to watch the video to know that Dr. Mike is going to be in their ear telling them to go lower, lighten the weight, get a deeper stretch, pause, slow down the eccentric. I know for a fact, I'll bet anything that I have, that that's going to come up in the video somewhere. So I think that's important when we start seeing some of this information branching out to more of like the Olympians and more of the untested world. But what do you guys think about that? Do you ever have those moments where we have a great topic, great discussion, we know that the people listening are going to take it to heart, but then you wonder, like, am I going to turn on the news and see someone talking about this stuff someday?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, Nick, because I think it was actually Mike or somebody on RP that was talking about, this is stuff that like the bodybuilders in the late 80s, early 90s, this is stuff that they were doing back then, and then you guys poo-pooed it and said, no, we got to go full range of motion. We got to, make sure that that we're adding the load and progressing overload and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was kind of like, well, you know what? Maybe the fact that, you have some assistance on there, it kind of speeds up the natural curve a little bit. It's like we swore we were seeing these things and it was all anecdotal evidence, and then you guys poo-pooed it. You know what I mean? And it's because they were a little bit out of the natural realm that probably, those adaptations that they were seeing, it was just sped up, We're seeing it now because we're applying them over a longer period of time. We're applying these over decades, whereas because things were a little bit helped out, they could see it in a lot shorter period of time, That was fascinating to me. And I don't want to misquote myself, especially in today's fact-checking world, but I remember hearing that and I thought, that is a really good point. That, yeah, maybe they saw these things way back then, and it was their anecdotal evidence, and they had a little bit of a shortened, kind of a learning curve.
Nick, I think as a collective, we've gotten better. I'm more excited because I think that the top athletes are going to figure it out at some point. Like, it's crazy to me how I think some of the best drug-free genetics are in powerlifting. But those guys don't play because there's these objective metrics, right? So they get smart very quickly. Things are a little bit more murky when it comes to bodybuilding, because if you have the right genetics, like, you can kind of get away with. People would be surprised with what you can get away with. But I guess it's more for the people who are like average to below average, that it's like you guys are the ones that can like really benefit from this. I was watching, it was a Netflix show. It was about that dude. I think it's called Who or something like that. I don't know. It's a guy he's got some sort of, he's a psycho. Anyhow, someone had said at a barbecue, it's like, oh, I'm all out of macros. And I'm like, what? I had to rewind it. Like, yeah, he couldn't eat because he was out of macros. So yeah, first of all, that character should have gotten coaching from us. We would have helped him out with that. But but I was like, wow, that's like, that would have been so fringe, like you know, a decade ago, right? So I think slowly, like the running, like people, when I go to a gym, I'm like, you know, on average, this is so much better. Like just the fact that women are weight training. I remember when I first started going to the gym, it's like they were all doing the cardio equipment, and then there was like one or two like rogue women that were like out there putting in the work, right? So that's changed. Like it's almost 50-50 in most gyms now. So I think we're improving a lot, and I think that it's exciting for me because the things that are, I think, sometimes too nuanced to go over, we can have more of that discourse. But again, it's like we have to elevate like the running average. But I think it's heading in the right direction. I'm excited for like 10 years from now, and like what the stuff that like some teenagers are going to like be fresh out the bag with. Like that to me is just dope, and it's just more normalized the weight training. I used to get teased, like, you know, in my early 20s for doing it, and now it's like the cool thing to do. It's like you need to take a gym selfie so that your friends know what's up, right? I guess if there's one parting thing I'd like to discuss, this is more so for, I guess, the women, while we're kind of on that topic. I kind of think the thrust or the bridge kind of overrated. They're obviously very short and biased, but I think they work for two reasons, because it looks so specific to the task that you're just going to work hard in it. You know, it's like, you know, like a dude doing biceps right in front of the mirror. It's like, I can clearly see my biceps working. So let me get a few extra reps, and, you know, you can connect both those things. Also, I think a lot of the camps that use those exclusively, something that no one ever questions is how many of those people are drug-free, right? Because here's the thing, when you are enhanced, the pumpy work is actually, this is just speculation, but to me it makes sense. It's important because you need to mobilize those compounds to the tissues that you're trying to target, even though, especially women, the things they use are a little bit more selective on average. Still, like, you want to like get that stuff into those tissues. And it's one of the reasons that even the most talented natural bodybuilders, as much as to the layperson, they might look enhanced, like if they kind of just turn at that right angle, you're like, he's natty. Like there's just like this little gawky flattiness to him that I caught in that instance, right? Whereas the enhanced guys, there's just like rounds, like every square inch of that like muscle fiber got to benefit from those compounds. So I think what I would like to see is over the next few years, like especially the hinging patterns, and especially like say an RDL, like I try to make it a goal for a lot of my female athletes who want to bring up the hip extensors, to get it to the point where somewhere at some point they can, and I know like these rule of thumb standards, like take them with a grain of salt, but I think it's doable for most. It's like, hey, 2 times body weight for reps is an excellent goal. If you can do that, there's a good chance that there will be a lot of remodeling that has taken place in that area. So just throwing that out there. I think most of our viewership is male, but they might have a significant other or a friend or a relative that, you know, it's like, hey, I want to bring up my hip extensors. I want to be caked up by next year. Like I think the RDL is great, and boy, like, do you feel strong? Like it's probably the closest thing. We poo-pooed a little bit on the squat and deadlift, but like when you RDL a good amount of weight, like, oh my God, you feel strong. And that's what hooks a lot of people, is like just like feeling strong for the first time in their life. So yeah, I just wanted to throw in some a little extra seasoning on this podcast. When it comes to the hip extensors, it's like ladies, get them straps. Like, you need straps. If you don't need straps, you're probably not going heavy enough. And a belt would also be rather useful as well. Yeah, and lift heavy. Like, learn the movement. Make sure the technique is sound, because there's a little bit of risk involved with that movement if you're doing it poorly. And you can be so strong. 2 times body weight, I think, is an excellent goal for reps.
The RDL is such a fun movement, because it's kind of like a compound and an isolation kind of packed together in one. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Just the way, like I almost like envision the hamstring pulling down, you know, and the glute pulling down on the ischial tuberosity. It's almost kind of like when you're prying back on that claw hammer in a way, you know, prying that nail out on that fulcrum. That fulcrum of the hip joint right there, it's just such a strong movement, and there's such big bones that are supporting it, and there's so many muscles that, I mean, let's face it, while we do hope and pray that no longer is the 405 pound the gold standard on squatting, but we also kind of see like these really deep leg presses, you know, it's just a plate and a half, you know, and things like that. I kind of hope that's one thing that people can grasp onto, is that, yeah, you can move a whole lot of weight, you know, and it is cool to see 8 plates on a bar, 4 on each side when you're squatting. And you can be part of that, you know, if you can just build up that RDL.
Yeah, for sure. What I was going to say was, with the bridge and hip thrust, I completely agree. I think the only time I use that would be with athletes who have pain and really can't do any other movement. All right, let's get some kind of stimulus back there. Good example is Jeff, right? Jeff got the hip thrust machine for his house. That is a little bit different because he gets a bit of a stretch at the bottom. So
yeah,
a little bit different.
One, yeah.
But yeah, I think it's probably overused, especially by females. So definitely look toward those RDLs. Yeah, something about the RDL, Brad, it seems like an isolation movement, and when you do it right, and there's nothing really better than that. It really does feel amazing. So I think everything's on a spectrum, right? We're not saying that all you should do is leg press with a 25-pound plate on it, but we're also don't want to be stuck in the squat is king kind of thought process. And also, I don't know if I mentioned this, but if you do have pain, one of the questions and one of the common misconceptions out there is that if someone has an image, an X-ray, MRI, or history of back pain, or if their mother and uncle and brother have back pain and they think they got a bad back or bad knees, can I ever squat again, or can I ever deadlift again? And I would say 199.9% yes, we can get back to something like that. At least try it, some kind of modification to it. So yes, we're saying don't be married to those movements, but also don't be fearful of them. So if you do have any chronic pain or fear, apprehension to the movements, but you really want to do them, let's try them. You know, reach out to someone that can help guide you into those movements. But yes, you are not your X-ray, you're not your MRI, you're not your genetic history, you're not the back injuries you sustained in high school. So yeah, don't be fearful of those compound movements, but also don't be married to them.
All right, guys. So I don't know about you, but my legs are a little bit toasted right now. I think it's time to get some post-workout nutrients in there. So, gents, if you don't have anything else, I want to thank you both for joining me here on Leg Day. And until next time, we'll catch you at the 3D Muscle Journey podcast.